So hello, my name is Krystyna Mokrzycka and I'm from Jagiellonian University in Krakow. And you can see the theme of my speech here. It is, can the courtroom become a science fair? A possibility of proving a person inculpable with neuroscientific evidence. And I will include 2 case studies. At the beginning, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to report at such an interesting conference. Although both new law and criminology have the same idea at their core, to avoid punishing a person who, at the time of committing the crime obviously, did not recognize its meaning or couldn't act in a different way, those 2 branches are fundamentally different. I'm going to present both perspectives in today's referat. So, as you can see on the screen, I attached a definition of neurocriminology, and it is a new branch of neuroscience with its roots in neurobiology and criminology. Its aim is to answer the questions whether, and if so how, using neuroscience we can understand, predict, and prevent crimes. So as you can see, it is like regular criminology, but with some new scientific background. It is not only limited to neurobiology, of course. Some people want to add cognitive science here or neuropsychology. I myself am a student of cognitive science too, and I can tell you that this actually can be helpful. Now, I will show you why, obviously. And before we move to dispelling the doubts of how can we mash it with law and how we can use it properly, let me briefly recall the conditions for exclusion of sanity and therefore culpa in Polish criminal code in force. Now, for those of you who do not know Polish criminal law, in Poland we have 5 adjectives to describe a crime, and all of them constitute thresholds for an act to become a crime. One of them is for it to be worth punishing and also to be culpable. Culpa is depending on what theory you take, because there are 2 concurring theories in Poland. One is from Krakow, one is from other parts of Poland, and since I am from Krakow, I'm going to obviously be presenting the Krakow one. And it is how and if the person could react in the situation they were put in, and if so, if they could act differently, why didn't they? And a person is deemed inculpable if they couldn't act other way. Why? One of the reasons is insanity. And you can see, this is the Article 31. Whoever at the time of commission of a prohibited act was incapable of recognizing its significance or controlling his conduct because of a mental disease, mental deficiency, or other mental disturbance shall not commit an offense. Also, if at the time of the commission of an offense the ability to recognize the significance of the act or to control one's conduct was diminished to a significant extent, the court may apply an extraordinary mitigation of the penalty. Now, is it precisely the inability? It is precisely the inability to recognize the meaning or to direct one's actions that neurocriminology wants to emphasize on. Because maybe in the future there will be more categories than those shown on the screen now. And maybe the category of those other reasons somewhere will be broken down into minor ones, right? You can see other mental disturbance, and you can see that's a rather fuzzy term. And maybe in the future, this term will become more fuzzy, and maybe it will be divided into some minor categories. So now I would like to illustrate the need to develop neurosciences and bring them to the courtroom with 2 case studies I prepared. And there are descriptions of actual events in which evidence, which was obtained through brain imaging, was used. And before I do it, this is a quick glimpse on a sentence of Appellation Court in Gdańsk, just to clarify what I said before. Okay, and now case 1. The first case was described in 2003 Its protagonist is a 40-year-old man who has never been in conflict with law all his life, and he has never shown any disturbance or any dysfunction, especially in the field of sexual preferences. He was happily married, he had a family, he was working as a teacher at a local school. Over time, however, this changed, and he became nervous, he became excited, he was aggressive towards his family, towards his wife especially, and in addition, he became acting out at school too. He started bringing pornography to school. In general, he became acting in a pedophilic way, and thus he was convicted with molesting one of his children's students. So it happened in France, so there is a psychiatric detention that was ordered against him due to which was according to their law. And even though the man knew what he was doing was wrong and he wanted to stop, he couldn't. He just simply couldn't control it. He could not shake off this learned tendency. And one day, his head started to hurt really badly. He got a real migraine, and this migraine lasted so long that his caretakers decided to take him to an examination. And a study showed that in his orbitofrontal cortex, there was a tumor of the size of an egg, and it was suppressing his brain in this area. After the tumor was removed, his pedophilic tendencies disappeared right away. Also, he started to really be able to control his behavior. His aggressiveness just disappeared, and he stopped being the way he became. Now, the frontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex, they're responsible for controlling our behavior, mostly. So it is natural that when they were suppressed, his behavior could not be controlled by him. And due to the fact that it was a mechanic process, not a psychological one, he could not ever be able to control it. And if it wasn't for this one migraine that took him to the examination, it would have never been discovered, and he would always be stigmatized as a pedophile, and he could possibly commit more crimes later. And just because of that one headache, it all became clear. But let's just think, what if it wasn't for this headache? What if this never happened? And he died of this tumor, obviously, but later on. It just seems so unreal that this one particular examination changed so much and actually shown us so much. Now, unfortunately, the disease returned after a few years because his tumor grew back. There was no doubt that because now, when he became aggressive again, that it was caused by this particular cancer. And should we then consider any person with a brain tumor in the orbitofrontal cortex, should we automatically consider this person insane? Should we automatically think that this person cannot ever commit a crime and cannot ever control their decisions? Because if so, then we get a large group of people who will be completely put aside of criminal liability. Can we use preventive measures to monitor those people and monitor their behavior? That sounds healthy, but what if this prevention is taken to a level where these people have absolutely no privacy and their law of privacy is completely deprived? Let's look at the second case now. This is a case without a tumor now. And here a young man brutally raped and killed his friend after a party. And his prefrontal cortex was examined, but it was, again, a complete coincidence because just at the time when he was being sentenced, a local psychological center for some research, criminological, etc., they decided to conduct an experiment with the hypothesis that murderers had a reduced level of ventral prefrontal cortex functioning. And if it wasn't for this examination, he would probably be sentenced for a long time in jail. But due to the fact that it was coincidentally there, he was referred to this examination. And as we can see on the screen, the hypothesis was confirmed. Let's look at his is on the right. Let's look at his brain and see that those red parts, the red parts are where the activity is somehow lower. We can see that almost half of his cortex is somehow impaired. Now, this obviously resulted in his lack of control against his behavior and a much, much lower threshold for aggressive behavior and for triggering aggressive responses in his behavior. And what was discovered is that he was a victim of child abuse all his childhood, and his parents used to hit him repeatedly on his head. And this hitting resulted in him having his brain damaged to such a degree that he could not control his behavior anymore. And now another question arises. Should we monitor every child abuse victim? Should we put some preventive measures on them and see if their brain is not damaged? Because obviously we could scan every person that was somehow abused, but aside from the wonderful ideology that comes behind it, it would be uneconomical because there is just simply not enough scanners and not enough money to scan every one person that was abused. So some people would have to be chosen, and if so, what criteria should be used to choose such people? This could generate some inequalities in some fields, and also, again, the right to privacy. So, as we can see, positions on these issues are still very polarized, which means that it still requires a lot of research. The fact is, however, that the achievements of neuroscience, especially neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience, cannot be completely denied. But how in this maze of conclusions and interpretations can we find a good way to reconcile those scientific positions and how to get the best of both legal and scientific world? And the answer is still not found. And it cannot be answered yet. We only know that a balance must be found. So we have to meet in the halfway between both scientific extremes, where we would like to see everything clear as it is, no matter what the subjects think. And even if we want to help the subjects, we want to see everything sometimes too clearly, and between the legal perspective that can also be very constraining for a scientific one. It is inherently related to people, not only as agents, social units, but also units of biological origin. Science is strongly interfering with human fates, and just as law, although it has its own specific nature that cannot be ignored. Thank you for your attention, and again, I'm really sorry for all those time problems. And here I attach a list of positions I used to prepare this presentation. So thank you again.